Hello, everybody, and a big welcome to composers Nicole Murphy, and Cawrse, and Elizabeth Younan, who are here as guests with me, Richard Willgoss, on Zoom. In early 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic began to show its restrictive potential, especially on activity in the arts professions. Nonetheless, and in response, sometime mid-2020, the call went out via the Australian Music Centre and Sydney Conservatorium of Music, inviting submissions to win composing commissions. The invite was for the prospect of composing a work for a group of instrumentalists between 2 and 8 strong and of duration approximately 5 to 6 minutes. But now, everything, including submission, judging panel to choose the winners, composition, performance, and final video, had to be conducted in a COVID-19 safe way, much of which would be online. Performances could only be on musical instruments where no breathing to make the sound is permitted. Brass, woodwind, voice, and the like could not be used. In line with the usual conditions placed on the Sue W. Composing Awards, only submissions from Australian female composers were accepted. A distinguished panel of 4 judges, Natalie Williams, Narelle Yeo, Matthew Heinsohn, and Paul Mason, eventually honed submissions down to choosing 3 winners who are with me today, virtually. Congratulations to you 3 on being the winners of the commissions and now making it through to composing and organizing performances of your personal musical responses to the virus, all done in a COVID-19 safe way. You were all underway in October 2020 and had composed, rehearsed, performed, and videoed your final versions as a one-take live performance by February 2021. Soon after, the final project video was edited to include the interviews along with the performance videos of your works. This composite video is now being made available via supporting institutions on the net and hopefully via YouTube. Before we see and hear the 3 works performed, let us briefly meet and greet the composers. Anne, your work, called Grounded, will be the first to be heard. Grounded can speak of being constrained in some way. How have you used the word to convey meaning? What is happening here?
What I was struck with when I was coming up with the idea for my piece was this idea of being stuck somewhere, this idea of grounded, being unable to travel, or unable to go to places, or to be busy, or to be mobile. But within that stuckness of actually finding something quite comforting, quite beautiful, and worthy of celebration. The whole idea of grounded came from a discussion with Sharon and Slava Grigoryan, who the piece is written for, and came out of their experience of being physically grounded, of suddenly not being able to tour as they usually would as musicians, and the joy that they found in that, somewhat surprisingly, during 2020, of being stuck at home and finding a real reconnection with family and with their home space.
Thank you. Elizabeth, your work, called Poem, is the second to be heard. I see it relates to poetry, overcoming limitations with the good. Although sometimes delicately quiet, because I've actually listened to these works, it's quite aroused briefly in the middle. What is the essence of how your work unfolds?
Well, this piece is called Poem, and it can refer to any poem that you like, although I do offer an interpretation. So I gained my inspiration from Khalil Gibran's On Giving from the Prophet. And there were a few lines in there that really spoke to me, and I'll just read them out briefly. There are those who give little of the much which they have, and they give it for recognition, and their hidden desire makes their gifts unwholesome. And there are those who have little and give it all. These are the believers in life and the bounty of life, and their coffer is never empty. So yes, this piece does have very delicate, quiet, subtle moments, but then there are also moments of celebration, of joy, of ecstasy. And I really wanted to explore the deep relationship that one can have with just a piano and a violin, because I think that such intimate statements can be made, and especially when you're in a concert hall, you can feel these visceral interactions. They almost become tangible. So that is what I really wanted to express in this piece.
Thank you. Now, Nicole, your work called Glimpse, on this occasion heard last, is sometimes rhythmic, sometimes not. Are we catching a glimpse of something maybe not noticed before?
Well, that's absolutely right. The inspiration for this piece came from just a very small moment in a Zadie Smith essay. And this is a collection of essays that she'd written at the beginning of the pandemic. But she was referencing a moment just prior to the pandemic, which she saw later on as, in hindsight, as a bit of a preview of life sort of slowing down. She was racing through New York City, a very busy day, head down, trying to get a coffee without making eye contact with anyone, as we often did, and just noticed a tulip that had worked its way up through the pavement and had this moment of just stopping in the middle of this hustle and admiring it. And later on, during that first lockdown, she sort of thinks back to this moment as if it were a preview of something that was always there, but the motion and busyness and activity that we sort of packed into our lives, you know, eclipsed this this tulip from, you know, never at the forefront of your mind. And so whilst the piece isn't quite that literal in its translation of it, the opening is very busy. There is a lot of activity, and there are fragments of gestures that bubble up from under the surface and then sort of recede away. So you get little moments of them coming to the fore, but they're not sort of front of mind. And then later in the piece, there is a section where all of that activity is stripped away and you are just left with these exposed fragments that, you know, you heard from the beginning in their full form.
Thank you. I'm interested in this inspiration that gave rise to your successful submissions, and it's now taken on into the final scores. What more can you tell me about this?
I'll start with my piece, Grounded. As I mentioned before, the idea for it came from talking with particularly Sharon Grigoryan about her and Slava's experience of lockdown back in March last year. And one of the stories that she told me was about her and Slava's little boy, Sebastian, who was about 20 months at the time. And prior to COVID beginning to sort of take control of everything early last year, Sebastian's life had been pretty much that of a touring musician. He was flying a lot between Melbourne and Adelaide, and was generally being looked after by one of them whilst the other was off touring and performing. So life for the three of them had been very, very busy. And suddenly, come March, everything stopped and they were home. And Sharon told me this beautiful story of seeing Sebastian outside in the yard 3 days into lockdown. And prior to this point, he'd been a very quiet child, fairly unsettled as well, and didn't speak very much. He only spoke mum and dad and his grandparents' names, but he was running around outside in the garden saying, happy, happy. And I was just so struck by this beautiful image of the the vulnerability and the joy in a child who doesn't understand, doesn't fathom what is going on, but senses that safety and that sense of home and belonging. So that was where this idea of grounded came from. And what I was trying to do in the piece was really celebrate that, starting with a bit of uncertainty, starting with stillness, but then actually sort of blossoming out into something which is quite joyful. One little other thing that I'll add is that woven throughout the entire piece, I've got Sebastian's name. So I've used the notes D sharp or E flat, E and B, spelling S-E-B if you use the German version of the E flat as an S. So that's a nice little addition in there, which felt really nice to be able to include that into the piece and really make it a real gift, I guess, to Sharon and Slava to encapsulate this difficult but really, really special time for them both in music.
Thank you.
That's really beautiful. And I guess with my piece, I was in so much awe seeing medical personnel and essential workers and even just family and caregivers give so much of themselves, and a lot of it is not celebrated, a lot of it is done in private. So that was one of the things I really wanted to communicate in the work through the intimate interactions between the piano and the violin.
Yeah, and we're going to hear that soon, aren't we? Indeed. Nicole.
Well, I mentioned the initial inspiration being the excerpt of the Zadie Smith essay, but I didn't talk about what determined the instrumentation for me. So the brief being that it had to be conducted in a COVID-friendly environment did make me think about what potential instrumentations could work in that way. And the attraction for me of chamber music is the intimacy that you get, that shared connection between performers, the small intimate nature of it. And what I didn't want to have to do was to sit 2 players or 3 players quite far apart and risk losing, that sonic connection between them. And so my piece, Glimpse, is written for 2 pianos. And the reason I selected that instrumentation is so that the bodies of the instruments would connect the 2 performers, so there is no gap between them. It still has that intimacy of chamber music with the bodies of the instruments filling the space between.
Thank you. Yeah, all intriguing for when we actually hear the works. You had to get your works performed on video after composing them. The list of players engaged reads like a who's who of the very best available here in Australia, and maybe internationally too. Their press notes, for instance, talk of barnstorming performances and winners of numerous leading awards. How did you choose the performers for your work? What is special about them?
Well, I was just trying to be very opportunistic about this opportunity to write something. So I had recently completed a piece for the Australian String Quartet, which had given me an opportunity to rehearse and spend some time with Sharon. And it was more just, I really loved her playing and haven't had a lot of opportunity to write very small chamber works. So when this particular commission came up, I had sneakily mentioned to Sharon, I should write you and Slava something sometime. So it just all kind of fell into place. And with both Sharon and Slava being based here in Adelaide and being absolutely wonderful people and consummate performers, I was just very, very lucky that we're all stuck here together, and I was able to write this piece for them.
Great.
With my piece, I asked the violinist Anna de Silva Chen and the pianist Vatche Jambazian. And what I think is kind of cute is that we all started out at the Sydney Conservatorium. We had our times never really overlapped, so we never really knew each other. And then at some point we all ventured overseas, whether that be to Europe or the US. And then we found each other back here at home in Australia. So I think that is kind of special that we've had very similar trajectories, geographically at least, and then managed to find each other here at home. Anna, Vatche and Oliver Schomaker, a clarinetist, actually performed an arrangement of the second movement of my piano trio at the Sydney Opera House. So that's where I actually met Anna and Vatche properly. And since no wind instruments were allowed, unfortunately, I couldn't ask Oliver to join. But so I asked them, well, would you like to come on this journey with me if I'm successful with this commission? So they were very gracious and came on board.
Splendid, splendid.
My performers, the two pianists are Viney and Anna Grinberg, the Viney-Grinberg piano duo, and they are exceptional performers. And, you know, I've admired their work for many, many years, and have the luxury of having them here in Brisbane, which is a terrific addition to, you know, the cultural landscape here. And so it was just a perfect opportunity. When I knew that I wanted to write for two pianos, there is no one else I would have approached. And, you know, they've both done a lot of new music, a lot of collaborations with composers. And one of the terrific things, as you know, the other composers will know, when you find performers who not only have that amazing skill set and great artistry that they can bring to a project, but really work hard to understand your compositional intentions and to help you realize them through a sort of collaborative process in the rehearsal room, you know, it's such a rewarding experience. And, you know, the rehearsal was the first rehearsal I'd had in a physical space, not on Zoom, for a year. And so it was really quite an emotional experience hearing this resonance and being able to interact in a really free, collaborative manner. So that's why I'm very lucky to have worked with Liam and Anna.
Fantastic. That's absolutely fantastic. I picked up some of the, shall I say, the quality of their combinations when I was watching and listening to their works. It was just astounding. The project has brought you three composers into closer contact with each other. Looking back now, how can you see your finished composition relate in some way to the other two?
I'll field this one. I think what is fascinating is that we spoke very briefly at the beginning of this project about some ways in which our works would relate. We didn't land upon anything concrete or specific, but it's fascinating that we then all went away, wrote our own pieces, and then came back and noticed a striking similarity in terms of energy and the structural trajectory that each piece takes. So we found that each piece has a very strong flow of energy from very touching, heartfelt moments, but also very joyous moments where all of the performers are so generous with their spirit and their interpretation.
Great. Yes, I'm sensing more integration in the works as I hear them again and again. And at this point, we have to recognize that at some point we have to get round to hearing them. So in closing, I'm going to ask all three of you, what on earth can be attractive to winning one of these commissions? Surely there are easier and more rewarding ways for you to write compositions. Or are you all just hard up like the rest of us?
Well, I'm a student, these are one of the main ways in which our work is funded. So I think I can speak for everyone in saying that it was a great opportunity to apply.
Absolutely. I think if you offer anyone who feels compelled to create an opportunity to do so with tremendous musicians, then they'll jump at the chance.
And as the other girls have said, I mean, Richard, you say, you know, surely there must be more rewarding ways. Actually, no, there isn't. To have people like yourself and Sue to sponsor and to encourage and to reward us for our time. It takes time, and it takes a lot of energy, and it takes a lot of skill, dare I say, to write music. And yes, it's been this whole thing, I think I speak for the three of us, has been a very positive experience. And we hope that everybody really enjoys what we have created.
Oh, they will. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, Nicole, and Anne, for sharing with us. It's been a real delight. It whets our appetite to now enjoy hearing your offerings. Even though we cannot be there in the live performance space, we have your written thoughts in the scores to go with both hearing and seeing the compositions performed. I might say by some of the most gifted musicians here in Australia. And here they are.